All right, folks, and thank you, good people, for hanging on to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast with Dr. Mark Goulston. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. A few questions flied in while we were on the show, Doc. And folks, if you're listening to this, please ask your question in the chat box on the right. It'll pop up on my screen. We'll make sure Doc answers them for you shortly. First one comes in, and this is number one, the long question. It says, thank you for bringing in the mental health considerations into this discussion. Question: what do you think the next generation will face as they head into the business world, and what can current business leaders do proactively to help them, which helps their business? Interesting. That's what you just said.
One of the things that greatly concerns me, and I just hope I'm an old fogey, there's an increasing impatience in the world. And we're not, AI is going to help with a lot of things, but we're not wired. Human beings are not wired like AI. And it really concerns me about the increasing impatience, because technology is all about speed. And what I would want to see is, in fact, there's something that we may be trying to promote through law enforcement, sheriff's departments, which is a program in which all families at 6 p.m., when you eat together, they sit down, and we're hoping that sheriff's departments will do this in their communities, and everyone sits down and the mom and dad lead these four prompts. What is something you felt upset about? What did it make you want to do? What did you do? How did it work out? And the reason we wanted to push that is because as I look at all the destruction of teens and of teens towards the world and adults towards each other, I think self-restraint is seen as something for wusses. And so I guess, I think and everything is quick, everything is quick. Let's do this. And AI is doing such. Your CRM, it better be up to date. Have you made so many calls? And so I hope there is a way to allow, to bring back in a certain amount of patience, time to think. And, but again, I could just be some old fogey who, should go back to watching Superbad since it was filmed in my house.
No, I say, gosh, I hope so. It is interesting. And I wonder if you agree with me on this, because, and you don't have to, and that's in fact my point exactly, is when I see people create new podcasts, which in turn is just anyone I see at an airport having a conversation or outside having a conversation, it's always like they have to be right. And they always want to get their points out, and they're listening to Fox and they're listening to CNN or whatever it is, they're listening to their own person, and they've got all those points, and they're going to keep going until they come to some resolve. Whereas I found with podcasts, it's much better to be the listener and almost say nothing. Do you find that people nowadays, when it comes to this impatience, when it comes to this, I have to get my point out, and my point has to be right, do you feel like it's almost just better just to listen sometimes and just say, sure, you're right, and move on?
Absolutely. I think it's amazing. I'll just bring up something. I don't want to get political about this, although I probably will write something about it, because I was thinking about the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated. And again, so using the Michelangelo mindset, and I'm vaccinated and I'm in favor of it because of the public health thing, but using the Michelangelo mindset, I thought inside people who aren't vaccinated is someone who wants to get vaccinated somewhere. So how do you find that? And so this is still a work in progress. And I was thinking, if you're someone, because of the public health issues, is scared when people are unvaccinated, when you talk to them, you're not talking to or with them, you're sort of talking at them.
Hmm.
And so you're approaching them with a closed mind that's basically between the words telling them they're wrong.
Right.
So what they're picking up is you're telling them your mind is closed and they're wrong, and you're expecting them to open their mind up to you. And especially for a lot of the disadvantaged population or certain races that are getting less vaccinated, the way the medical world treats African Americans and Hispanics, I mean, it's coming out. They get poorer treatment than others. So in my mind, I'm thinking, gee, people are on my case to get vaccinated. These are the same people that don't treat me very well, at the hospital, and my mom and dad are the ones who basically told me not to get vaccinated. Right. So they're asking me with a closed mind to let go of where I get my belief from.
Right.
And they're not even open to having a conversation with me, because I've seen that when I go into healthcare and they don't have conversations with me there. So do you follow what I'm saying? I think there needs to be a way of really being curious about where someone's coming, because then they'll open up to. Can I tell you
Yeah, I was just going to say it's one example of many.
Yeah. So here's kind of I don't know if it's a humorous anecdote, but I think it's very, it says a lot. I remember many, many years ago, someone came in and he was paranoid, and he says to me, you're the 7th psychiatrist I've seen in a couple of years. And I said, well, it sounds like you've seen a lot of psychiatrists. And he says, yes, I have. And he says, but before we get talking, I need to ask you a question. The people on top of above me just keep making noise all night long. That's all they do. And I was going to say something like, it sounds frustrating. And he looks at me and he says, but before you answer, you need to know that I am on the top roof of my building and there is no access to anything above me. And then he looked at me with a Chris Rock gotcha. How are you going to answer that? Because he starts saying the people above me are making this noise. And he looks at me with a smile. How are you going to handle that? And I was thinking, he's seen 6 or 7 psychiatrists. And I know they'd say, well, I can see how that's frustrating. Well, that's part of the symptoms. And, we might be able to make that better and yada, yada, yada. But he'd been through 6 or 7 of them. And so I remember I went inside my head and I said, do I want to help him or do I want to give him another reality check? And he's staring at me. And his name is John. And I looked at him and I said, John? And he says, yes. I looked at him and I said, I believe you. And he looked at me and he started sobbing, because no one had ever validated anything he said. So the setup was, are you going to tell me I'm crazy? And whatever. And so my thought was, I'll empathize. And I won't just empathize, but I'll just validate it. And he just starts sobbing. And I thought, oh, I've really released someone, they're never going to get. But I knew he would calm down. And after about 7 or 8 minutes, he stops crying. His eyes are bloodshot. He has a huge smile on his face. And he says to me, it does sound effing crazy. And then we developed a relationship. But do you follow what I'm trying to prove? Is that
yes,
sometimes we have to go to where they're at as opposed to approaching them with a closed mind, paying lip service, saying, well, we want to understand why you believe that. But if what they're picking up is we're broadcasting, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Do you follow me? There's ways to
absolutely meet them where they're at. empathy. I understand. Now, where can people meet you where you're at? Where can people find more information about the Michelangelo mindset, about your book, about your podcast?
Okay, so I think if you go to LinkedIn, and I put a link in there that's pretty up to date. But Michelangelo mindset is very beta. I mean, if you go there, it's like a couple pages, but the idea seemed so compelling is why it's nominated for a Breakthrough Idea Award. So you can go to Michelangelo Mindset and contact my partner, Ken Sky, or I through that. My website's markgoulston.com. And my podcast is My Wakeup Call. And you can get that wherever you find your podcasts. And we're up to, I think, episode 220. And if you stayed this long and even enjoyed our meandering conversation here, which I take full responsibility for, but that's what the My Wake Up Calls are. What I do is I ask people what matters most to you in life and just tell us the story of how you got there. And we've had people like Larry King, controversial people like Jordan Peterson, Tom Steyer, he ran for president, Esther Wojcicki, who has these amazing daughters who seem to run the world. And I hope people will check that out.
All right, folks, we'll go on over there. The My Wake Up Call podcast. Mark, it was a pleasure speaking to you today, my friend. I'm glad you came on the show. I knew with all of your experiences, it'd be hard to fit it under 45 minutes to an hour. And I appreciate you sharing these stories so in depth, these in-depth stories. Very, very riveting and impactful, Mark. So I appreciate you coming on the show today.
My pleasure. And in post-production, have at it and just rip the heck out of it, Kevin.
No, we do these all raw. We don't do any editing at all. This is all going in, folks. And you can find this episode next week on Apple Podcasts. Just go and search Real Leaders Podcast there, Spotify, anywhere you listen to a podcast. It'll be up in 1 week's time. For Dr. Mark Goulston, I'm Kevin Edwards, asking you to go out there and always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Doc.